Hello, and welcome to this celebratory event. We're celebrating Maja Lunde getting the Bjørnson Award, and all of us sitting here are very happy about that. I've got now a panel of people that really know, they know my books very well. So I got Ingrid Weme Nilsen here in Oslo, and she has adapted the history of these for the theater. So it's going to be on stage soon. Thomas Böhm is a prolific critic and publisher from Germany. And Parsons is head of publishing in Harper Collins. In New York, Anna O'Grady is head of publicity in Simon Schuster in Australia. So we're now talking across 14 time zones, I think. And the reason is that we are now very much influenced by this global pandemic. A pandemic that also shows us how united we are as humankind. A theme that is very much present in my Lunde's work. And what I wanted to do was to show and hear how Maja's books have affected the world and brought us together in one message of climate change and how we as humans are fighting to make the best, to create the best possible living environment for ourselves, and also how this frail and difficult task is affecting us all in different ways and uniting us across time and place. So first of all, I will jump all the way to the other side of the world to ask Anna O'Grady about how is the impact of Maja Lunde's books in Australia. And I would think that especially her novel Blue has had a really big impact, where you were struggling just now with this enormous forest fire in Australia right before the pandemic. So can you tell us a little bit about that, Anna?
Yes, hello from Australia and hello from almost the beginning of winter. So it's not only just the time zones, but also different seasons in here. And would you believe, as I'm speaking to you, it's evening in here. It's actually absolutely pouring rain, which is amazing, and we're all very happy about it. Yes, definitely the second book of Maja has really a very special effect in here in Australia. And I have to say that when our fires sort of intensified in January, I reached out to Maja because I kept thinking about her book and how much what she was writing about then seemed almost impossible to imagine, and yet it was happening outside my window. I actually live right on the outskirts of Sydney, and I live right on the entrance to a huge national park. And this is the second time we have been in this house now for 10 years. It's the second time where we had a fire brigade walking from door to door and essentially telling us we need to have our essentials packed beside the door. And when they come and knock on the door, we have 10 minutes to leave the house, which seems like almost impossible to imagine that we actually got to the stage that it could be so drastic. And of course, when I was looking outside the window, I have been thinking about Maja's book and the story of particularly David and Lou and what was happening in France and how much of that was completely reflected in here. The thing that I find with a lot of these books and particularly with Maja's book is that they kind of present this 3D picture, imaginary picture of the world. You get the past and the present and the future all kind of at the same time. And when we see these kind of a drastic effects on the climate outside, which are still relatively rare in a lot of these developed countries, suddenly that 3D picture from literature is right in front of my eyes. And I think also what is interesting about books like that, and I particularly love fiction for this, I have read a lot of nonfiction books. I'm generally interested in the climate science. So there's a lot of science behind it. And these books are about the answers. And of course, we have so many different answers to these problems, and nobody really know which is the true one, or which is the right one, or what part of the world should be reacting which way. But with fiction, and that is so much with Maja's fiction, what is so powerful is that her novels are about questions. What kind of questions we should be asking? And it's probably the right questions that are going to bring us to the right answers. And I think also that what is so special about her books is that, yes, it's a big picture of the climate, but it's a picture of us and families surviving through it. And suddenly it's no longer a question of the science or, that much forest has burned or that many animals have died. It is the question of us, our families. How are we going to survive it? What am I going to say to my 10-year-old son? 20 years from now, what have we done about it? What kind of questions I have been asking? And I think that Maja's books are so good and putting this kind of a bigger picture, or I should rather say actually opposite, a smaller picture against a very big canvas, that my life and the life of my family have an importance in this big climate issues. And her books are a lot about questions. It's so beautifully reflected, particularly in the dialogues between the parents and children. What kind of questions the children are asking then or in the future. But these are the questions that we need to be asking now. And I think that is something that I really, really love about her books. And I know that a lot of readers particularly connect with this. And obviously, yes, our January massive fires in here. You can imagine, to give you a reference, I'm not sure how much you have seen about this in Europe, but we lost 18 million hectares. It's like half of Norway has burned down. I mean, the loss in here is just absolutely almost unimaginable. 1 billion animals have perished in this fire. The numbers are just absolutely staggering. And yes, of course, Australia is very, very big. But still, if you think about the biodiversity that's lost in these kind of fires, and it is also for me kind of a point where these fires were now so big, because Australia had suffered for fires for millions of years. This is a cycle that happens, but never on this scale. I think it's a tipping point where it's no longer possible to just pretend or sit there and think, it will pass, this is natural. You no longer can do that, which in some way is interesting. It's a point where, the people are galvanized. It is the time to make the change. We can no longer just sit and believe this is a natural change. It's our time. And we need books like Maja's books to remind us that we need to ask the right questions of the right people right now.
Thank you, Anna. Can we jump across the globe to Tara Parsons in New York, sitting in New York in early morning in New York? How is your take on Maja's books? What is the most gripping thing for you about her books? What do you love the most? What characters are speaking to you the most? And what kind of reaction do you get from American readers in a country where you have a climate change denier as a president, actually? So,
well,
could you tell
Anna,
us a little bit more?
Of course. So thank you so much for having me here. Maja, both personally and professionally, is so important to me. I just love her as a person. She is so warm and wise. But professionally, I'm so proud to publish her books in the United States, especially because our political administration is quite divisive. So as you were saying, there are people who are climate deniers, but then of course we have wonderful climate activists as well. What we're seeing in the United States ever since this new administration is that there's so many people who are on one side of the coin or the other side, and it never seems that you hear from people in the middle. Especially in our media, it feels like you only feel one way or the other. But in the truth of the matter, the thing that unites us all are our families, our friendships, and I think that's what you see in Maja's books. This is the thing that ties everybody together. She's not writing in her books, you should believe this or you should believe this. She's really talking about these intimate relationships between fathers and daughters and mothers and sons. And that's what really struck me to my core. One of my favorite characters is Dao. And it's not the least because I'm Asian as well. So her parenting technique was very familiar to me, both as a parent to my children, and as, you know, a daughter as well. So that really connected me to the history of bees. And of course, her love for her son, that she would do anything for him, is really what draws you into her books. And as you keep reading, that's when you really say to yourself, what am I doing in this world? What is really happening to this world? And what is my effect on it? And as Anna said, Anna put it so beautifully, I think what it says to yourself is, what am I leaving to my children in this world? What is going to be my legacy for them? How are they going to live in this world when I'm gone? What have I done to make it a better place? Or what have I done to make it a worse place? So I think those are really important questions that she asks without hitting the reader over the head with it. And I think that's what so many readers have connected to here as well. My own family members, some extended family members, are not on the same political spectrum as I am, but they love Maja's books. And I think that has changed their perspective ever so slightly on the things happening politically in our country. Especially right now, even when it relates to the coronavirus, there's a lot of people who are, you know, deniers of the virus, of the effect of the virus, and people who are terrified of the virus. But in the end, now that we're all sheltered at home, we've all started reading again. What was interesting in the first few weeks of the virus here, the book industry saw a big drop. I think everybody was watching Netflix. And then a couple weeks in, I think everybody reached the end of Netflix and they started reading books again. And what we saw with the books that people started to read again, they wanted to read books that were really about nature, about, you know, starting your own gardens, connecting with your children, books for kids, books that parents could read with their children. My son actually has read both of Maja's books and been really affected by them in the best ways. It's actually a great book to read, I think, with a teenager or a middle school age child. And it's been really wonderful, I think, to see that change happening in our society here. Well, we've only published 2 books here. Blue is called The End of the Ocean in the United States. But I think both of these books are books that that families can read together and get a lot out of. My favorite character in The End of the Ocean is Sinye. I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation of her name. But for me, I love strong, sort of crotchety older women, which is what Sinye is to me. And my father is a sailor. So in his free time, it's his favorite hobby. So we've spent a lot of time on his boat together. And he has verified that all of the boat details are absolutely correct, which is wonderful. But I love her because she is, she's so relatable because she lives in the present day. And it's very much the struggles that are happening now, the timeliness of the water crisis now, and what should we really be doing for our future. So I don't know, I started rambling a bit, but I hope you got something there that you could use.
That's wonderful, Tara. But do you got some kind of reader's response that you can remember, that people being really affected by the novel, and what did affect them?
Well, I think the interesting thing is that people really have been affected by the father-daughter relationship in The End of the Ocean, and the mother-son relationship in The History of Bees. And you see that time and time again in both the professional critical reviews here and in the reader reviews on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. You can see that over and over again, which has been really powerful. I think for most people, it's an interesting thing. We don't really talk about climate fiction in the United States. It really isn't a thing here in the way that it has been in Europe. That's what I've heard anyway from different people, that, you know, it's sort of a strong genre around the world, except for in the United States. So people don't really come to it and say, oh, this is climate fiction. They come to it and say, this is a relationship book that has also said to me, I should be caring about the environment for my family.
Thomas, in Germany, you're sitting in a country where I believe you have kind of climate fiction. And how do you see Maja's fiction compared to other climate fiction novels? And yeah, that's my question.
I'm wondering whether we really have climate fiction, because I remember it was not more than 1 year ago, the most important German climate researcher by the name of Joachim Schellenhuber, who is also an advisor to Angela Merkel, said that those researchers need the help of literature, in the sense of they needed depictions, illustrations of what we are facing. Sadly enough, Australia delivered them, but still, you know, we all get the idea. And he was kind of referring to a lack of this kind of literature on behalf of German authors. Now, we all know you always have to be very careful when you speak of German literature or American literature and so on. It's maybe somebody is writing the novel of all novels in this very moment, but still, one could say Maja's novel touched the right string at the right time. And as you were asking about readers' reaction, I may tell you that The History of the Bees was the most successful book in German book-selling landscape in 2017. In a year, she sold more than 350,000 copies. She was even more successful than Dan Brown was in the very beginning. The most successful in Germany. And there's a speciality here in Germany, which is we still have around 3,000 independent bookshops. And in order to become the most successful book, you have to convince these booksellers all over Germany. We are very proud of our bibliodiversity, as we call it. And these bookshops, these independent bookshops, are kind of strongholds of this bibliodiversity. So Maja, being the most successful book, illustrates that so many people were kind of waiting for such kind of book, telling us what we are heading to, because there was this unstructured, ungrippable feeling that we're heading into a future. And now here was the book which was telling us, given all the facts, given all the strength, which we already talked about, the emotional touch, the strain of the family, and so on and so on.
I'm wondering, Ingrid, do you have any thoughts on, or can you describe a little further how kind of Maja is building her stories? I know that the one story you know the best is the history of bees, since you have been adapting this for the stage. So you know this book extremely well. And can you tell us a little bit about what is the driving forces in her book, and how is kind of what is the deeper structure of the story?
Yeah. I think that Maja has kind of developed her own formula for novel writing with several main characters in different places at different times. And I think the fact that they are living in different parts of the world at different times is kind of giving her an extremely, a very good potential to tell stories that reaches beyond geographical and temporal limits. And it also opens up to the reader's imagination, because you kind of have to use your own fantasy to fill in the gaps between the different stories in the books. And this also makes her novels very good when it comes to theater, I think, because in the dramatic literature you can put people on stage at the same time and create dialogues between different places and across borders. So it's been very interesting to work with. And also when it comes to what motivates the characters, it's well, when it comes to the history of bees, it's of course this the love for a child, a mother's love for her child, and it is such a strong force, and it makes it so it's so intimate, and creates the possibility for very intimate emotional scenes. At the same time as there are also the very large perspective, yeah, I think it's kind of a unique formula. It's very interesting, and it has a great potential both for theater and reading experiences, I think.
Anna, what is the scene in Maja's books that has kind of stricken a chord for you the most, that kind of really hit your heart?
I would say definitely is the human emotions and their relationships. And I'm kind of thinking in the terms, it actually, as I was listening both to Tara and to Thomas, I was thinking about something that it's kind of a combination of the two voices. And I think that Maja is very good at that. Because Tara is correct that in a lot of these, the climate books, you know, you get people of more right-wing, left-wing, and they get very polarized by it. And also Thomas is very right that a lot of people they're not necessarily involved in politics, but they want to understand the human emotion in all of this. And I think Maja, very few authors actually, when I think about it, managed to achieve that she is not, yes, you get quite a bit of facts, especially in the history of bees, about what happened to the bees, less so maybe in the end of the ocean. So you do have some science, but really what it is about these relationship between people, and particularly the parenting relationship. Because when I think through sort of the books that I enjoyed the most within this genre, I immediately think about, you know, the Cormac McCarthy, The Road, which again, you know that there was a disaster, but really the book is about the relationship. I think about the Station 11, which is so much the relationship as well. but I can still count really just on one hand probably these type of books where the setup is against the future that is unknown. And also the setup reminds us that, you know, it's not very likely that the world will disappear one big bang. It will disappear over, you know, extinctions and fires and floods. And we will have to manage for this. And through all of this, one thing that will stay constant are the human relationships, and relationship between parents and children is the survival of the next generations. And I think as a lot of the things that we've been reading about become more real, you know, these kind of books really help us to imagine how will we live as people? How will we live as families? What will stay constant? You know, things will change around, but there are some things that will stay constant. I think Maja is very good at capturing it. So she makes it, I think, accessible in a sense that even though we are frightened of that future and it's unknown, we can also identify ourselves within it, because we can identify ourselves within these very primal family human interactions. And also that's why people connect with these books. You know, they might not imagine the world of France in the future, but they can imagine these kind of conversations with their children. She's very, very good at that.
Thank you, Anna. I'm thinking the pandemic might have made it all more clear to us how we're connected and how a catastrophe kind of interferes with our lives and makes it more important with, as Tara said, with gardening, taking care of our children, just how much I've been kind of missing to hug my friends. So what do you think about that? Will this pandemic give an even stronger push for Maja's books to reach out to people, just because her books is kind of describing some of the problems that we now see clear with the pandemic? Tara, do you think, have you any thoughts on that?
I absolutely think that is the case. You know, there's a famous quote here that fiction reveals the truth that reality obscures. And I think that's what Maja's books do. And, you know, we're all talking so much about how the relationships at the heart of these books is the conduit through which she is talking about nature and our world and the importance of it and the importance of honoring it and how it's interconnected with your family. And the virus is, you know, they were calling it the great equalizer, but of course we know that it's not the great equalizer because it's affecting different communities, different economic levels, differently, at least in the United States it is. But it is the great equalizer in the sense that when your family member becomes sick, that is equal. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, you're terrified if your child becomes ill, you're terrified if your partner becomes ill. And that's something that you can't deny. So, and likewise, when you're home and you don't have as easy access to groceries or to entertainment or whatever it is that you're usually spending your life doing, all of the things that are actually important become very obvious to you. So it was interesting, Earth Day here became a bigger deal, I think, or people noticed it more. People were talking about it more on social media. People were doing things for Earth Day or making commitments for Earth Day in a way they hadn't before. And of course, I had to put on my, you know, associate publisher hat and do a great big promotion for Maja's book on Earth Day. So we did a beautiful promotion on Amazon for it, and it was incredibly popular. And I think people really responded to the storyline, of course, but also that they were going to find out something about nature, but also read a book that spoke to them about the importance of family and how you're feeling about your family members right now. When you were talking earlier about asking about your favorite scene in Maja's books, one of my favorite scenes is actually the end of what we call The End of the Ocean, which I know is published as Blue in other countries. Because, and it was very interesting, the translation in the United States, when I first received it, was not very hopeful. It was very dark. And I spoke a lot with Maja about that ending. And she made a few little edits to it so that in the English language, it would speak to both how heartrending that scene is, in case anyone listening to this or watching this doesn't know the end of the book. I don't want to give it away, but there's a moment when David, the father, is describing to his daughter Lou what the sound and smell of rain is like. And I think whether you're a parent or not, I happen to be a parent. So when I think about having to describe that to my children, it's the most heartbreaking thing you could possibly do, I think. But it's also really powerful to think about describing something to your children that you hope will happen again. It feels so mundane when you have it all the time. But when you don't have it, it's the most important thing in the world. And I think that's such a great parallel to what's happening right now. You know, you take your health for granted. You take it for granted that you can walk around or do these mindless activities. And when you now have to exercise so much caution and wear masks all the time, you really start to understand the importance of human connection, of touch, of being able to have the freedom to move around. And I don't know, I think it's just even more striking when you read these books now in this pandemic to note that and to say to yourself, really, what am I going to do now to help make this a reality for my kids in the future?
How is that in Germany, Thomas? How do you see this Maja's book in light of the pandemic? And is it special characters or scenes that have really stricken a chord in you that you feel is extra important for you in her books?
First of all, about the pandemic. I think if there is some kind of message in Maja's book, this is what the world is going to be if we don't act now. She illustrates that. And most of us may have thought, okay, we will not be able to convince the peoples of the world on a large scale that change is possible. So now what the pandemic has shown us is we can change on a massive, broad level we have never thought about. We do not need to travel in the inner cities every day. We do not have to travel the world, and so on and so on. But what are we doing now everywhere in the world? We are talking to restart, talking about restarting again, meaning let's go back to the old routines where I'm really missing the voices which say, okay, what we experience now, we are downsizing, we stop traveling. Let's use this as a unique, probably our only opportunity. It's our only opportunity to think again, to not head into a Maja Lunde world, if I may so say, call it a little bit ironic. On the second chance, on the second aspect is what the virus has also taught us is we count as individuals. We have to act responsible as individuals. We have to protect our closest friends, family, and so on and so on. This is exactly what we need to do when it comes to the environment. We have to act responsibly. We have to, you get the point, on a large scale then. And when you're asking me for my favorite scene, I think it's the one in which it's from the history of the bees, when William is giving his first ever scientific lecture to the people in the village. He's a little bit nervous, and what he's doing is he tells them literally about the birds and the bees. And he tells them about the sex life of the bees. And in the end, he gains a wife, the only one from the villagers who's not laughing at him. But then there's another curve, another turn, twist of the story. He feels afterwards that she only picked him for reproduction, like the bee queen picks the drone. This is something to add, as we have, this is how clever, how tricky, how much frustration, you know, in a good sense, frustration is interwoven into Maja's stories. Otherwise, I would not keep sticking, reading, wanting to know where they're heading to.
Ingrid, what can you tell me? How do you interweave the stories in the history of bees? Are they talking to each other across time and space? And is it a special character that you feel especially strong for, that has kind of it has in your heart, and why?
Yes, in the theater, everything is possible, and people can talk across time and across geographical borders. That's what's so fantastic. I think.
Like we do now.
What? Excuse me.
Like we do now.
Yes, like we do now. Well, I think I have several favorite characters in Maja Lundes universes, but of course there is Tao, who is impossible not to love, but there is also Charlotte, William's oldest daughter, who I felt, well, I had a growing sympathy for her working on the script for the theater, because she's kind of, it's like she's born into the wrong place at the wrong time. She has so high intellectual ambitions. She's very talented, but it is impossible for her to get the attention she deserves from her father and from other authorities around her, because she lives in a time where women doesn't have to, or no one thinks that women can have these kinds of interests. And she's always competing with her older brother, Edmund, who is who does not have her talent. So I was very drawn to her, and enjoyed very much working to build that character. And when we were talking about favorite scenes, I would like to draw attention to the scene in the history of the bees with Tao in the library. I find that an extremely interesting and wonderful scene, because she's in an old library, and I think it kind of implies that a lot of the answers that we are looking for are already there, right in front of us. It's just that we don't, it's not like we don't know what to do with the climate changes. We know what to do. It's just that we don't want to, we don't do it. And I think it's really interesting that Tao is seeking answers in this lockdown library, and it's kind of like everybody's there all the times. All the characters from all the different times and all the different places are in this library. Yeah, well, I think it's a very rich and exciting scene.
To connect to Maja's speech that she will be holding just now, a little bit later, she will be talking about the power of books and the power of writing and how we all connect through books. So do you have any thoughts on that? To me, it's magical that we actually can talk across time and space with small kind of black letters on white paper. That everything can happen within us if we just open that book. So do you have any thoughts on kind of the magic of books to end this session? Thomas, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a passage in John Ruskin's who says that we all have the possibility to meet kings and queens, not in real life, but the kings of queens of the mind are always waiting for us, and they will always grant us their time whenever we want to, in books.
That was beautiful. Do you have any thoughts on that, Anna, Tara, or Ingrid?
Well, I feel, you know, when I often think about it, and you can see it sort of behind me, I feel extremely lucky to have always worked in this world. I come from 3 generations of booksellers, and I've worked in books in 7 different countries, 3 different languages. And I find that everywhere that I've moved, you know, these first weeks where you go and you feel homesick, the place for me to go was always bookshops, because I would go to these places and there would be lots of books that I would recognize. They're classics, they're things that I've read as a child or an older teenager. And then there are all these new books. There are all these amazing writers across the world. And every time you go and you discover these incredible voices, and you can be anything and anybody and anywhere in past and future. It's like holding conversations with people that you would otherwise never, ever had a chance to meet. So I thought this, and the other thing, I mean, I work in publishing now, but as I said, for years, I've worked in bookselling. And I often had in my head the kind of a voice from my grandfather, who is a bookseller, and who was always told that said, you know, to sell books and to deal with books is one of the most amazing things in your life, because you are really holding somebody else's dreams in your hands to literally pass them to another person. I mean, it's really, really magical. And, you know, to kind of tie it all to Maja, I mean, Maja came here 3 years ago on a tour, and I had, you know, great fun. We had an amazing time. We were traveling through Australia from New Zealand, and I just thought again myself, as an ordinary person, you would not really have a chance to meet somebody like Maja unless you were a reader. And then you can meet somebody like this, and you can have these incredible conversations. And I cannot imagine really working with any other industry than this. And I cannot imagine what the world without books would be. You know, I just cannot imagine what it would be like. As long as we have stories, I think there's still hope for the future, because it's really just sharing our thoughts. And I think for books, we discovered that in fact, there's always more that binds us together that divides us. And I think Maja, again, with the way she writes her books, you may agree or disagree with the climate change, but we all love our children. We all want the best for them. And that's the power of stories. So I am extremely, you know, I'm extremely happy for her that she's getting this amazing award. And I know that I'm not speaking just for myself, but for lots of readers around the world who will be delighted to hear this news.
Tara, do you have any thoughts on that? On the
I do. You know, I've loved books ever since I was a very small child. And one of the reasons why is because my family was always sort of the unique family where we lived. So, you know, I was the only Asian person there. I didn't necessarily see myself or my family in the people around me. So the first time I saw that in a book, it felt that I was really seen for the first time. And that's when I really started to love reading. And I think as I've gone on in time, the other wonderful thing about reading is that you don't just see yourself, but you start to see the people around you, and you start to see them in a bigger way, so that you're not just seeing the parts that are harsh to you. You're then saying to yourself, oh, they have a completely different belief system than I do, but I know from reading this book about a similar character that they also have pain in their life or wonderful things in their life. They're a real whole person, and I have now empathy for that person. I feel more for that person, and I'm not going to judge that person based on one side that I'm seeing. And I think especially in Maja's books, I mean, when I read The History of Bees, you know, I thought to myself, Tao is me. And I thought, George is my mother-in-law. You know, he comes from the heartland, and he's a good person, and he's stuck in his old ways. And then you saw William. William actually was a very interesting character for me, because I felt so divided about William. And I felt he was a terrible father. But then you start to see all the different facets of William's personality. And just like in real life, people are complicated. They have wonderful parts to them and terrible parts to them. And I was just saying to my kids the other day, we were going for a walk, and we were doing that game where we're saying, say something nice about each other, because the children were fighting. And I said, you have to say something nice about each other now. And then at the end they said, well, you have to say something nice about us. And I said, you know what? Both of you have so much empathy for so many different kinds of people and for animals. They can't see an animal in pain. They hate to see a person struggling. They have so much secondhand embarrassment for people who are struggling. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think they have that from how much reading that they do. I think they see so many different kinds of people, see them as three-dimensional people, and don't just see somebody as one political viewpoint. And I think, you know, it's so important now, especially in the United States, but everywhere really, to think about the things that unite all of us together and not the things that divide all of us, and to you know, have a lot of patience for the people who don't share your political viewpoint, because in the end you're all struggling with the same things.
That was beautiful, Tara. I was thinking about the thing you said, Ingrid. It's both very strong female characters in Maja's books, but there are kind of also interesting men. It's old people, young people. It's you adapting for the stage. You get everything. You get all kinds of people from all parts of the world, from all ages, united in their humanity, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think it has a very good potential for a very interesting theatrical performance, and it kind of shows that we are all in the same boat, and that what we are harvesting now is what someone else has sown in another time, and that we are all connected together. So yeah. And I was also thinking about when we're talking about the force of literature and books, it's also what the book symbolizes. The book symbolizes knowledge, education, and it's important for Tao, for instance, in the History of Bees, to learn her son how to count, how to read. And I think that's something we should, yes, it's also a very important aspect, education and knowledge, and the children, the importance of children, who has such a high symbolic value, of course, in all kinds of literature, of course.
As the symbol of future and hope for the future. And with that, I will end our session here. It was so nice to talk across a lot of borders and a lot of time zones. I'm so happy to have been talking to you, and thank you for coming.